Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar, ADHD Awareness Month Strategies That Work. I'm going to be your host. I'm Zoë Kessler, and I host the webinars for PsychCentral.com. And tonight I'll be hosting and presenting. So it's kind of double duty for me. And I'm going to ask, first of all, if everybody can hear me. And if you can't, please click on the icon in your dashboard that has a little hand, and that shows that you're raising your hand to say, I can't hear you. So I hope you can. Anyway, this is a special month. It's October, which is International ADHD Awareness Month. So what I've done this month is I designed two webinars, one at the beginning of the month that offered some strategies and tips and talked about ADHD and how it affects us and some of the things that we go through having ADHD. So before we begin, I want to show you my website address, zoekessler.com, and my Twitter address is at chickadd44, and I really hope that you'll reach out and connect with me either place. That would be just great. I've got some videos to share on a number of ADHD topics. So the first, oh yes, surprise! I forgot. At the very last minute, because I really like to do things last minute apparently, I decided that as a little reward, because I know a lot of you have been working really, really hard to work on some of the strategies that were in the handout that was provided with the first webinar, to really look at your life and find out where ADHD is tripping you up, where ADHD is problematic for you, and challenge yourself to really come up with some strategies that do work for you. And I'm really hoping that tonight some of you will share strategies that you've tried and that have worked, or they don't even have to be some of the ones that I suggested. And in fact, even better, if you could contribute, that would be just great. So what I decided at the last minute was that you really deserve a reward. You really do. So what I'm going to do is at the end of the webinar, I am going to put everyone's email address in a hat, and I'm going to pick one, and our lucky winner will get a copy of my book, ADHD According to Zoë. The book is part memoir because, of course, I myself have ADHD. I was diagnosed late in life. I was almost 47 years old and had a lot of catching up to do. So I wrote about that and sort of anecdotal stories from my life about how the different ADHD symptoms have shown up and how I've dealt with them. At the end of each chapter, there are some strategies and tips on what you can try depending on, again, what sort of trait, ADHD trait, whether it's disorganization or time management skills or so on. Depending on what trait is causing you problems, it offers a lot of helpful suggestions, I hope, and some resources. But I also frame each of the ADHD symptoms or traits in terms of the research, because I think it's really important to get a handle on what the cause of these traits is before we start to try and tackle them. So the first webinar at the beginning of October talked about 7 different areas, and I call these the keys to success, because ADHD, really does permeate our lives and in different areas for each of us. So the first thing I wanted to do was talk about ADHD, which some people refer to as a gift. I usually use that word somewhat facetiously. Yes, there are aspects of ADHD that we can consider a gift, and I'll get to some of those later in this follow-up webinar. And I also tried to draw attention to call people to look at where ADHD manifests in their lives. We also talked about the warning bells. ADHD symptoms or traits or experiences can come with some pretty pretty good signs that something's going on, and I wanted folks to be aware of the fact that this could come in the form of a thought or a feeling, physical sensation. So, for example, having lived my whole life with undiagnosed ADHD up until, middle age or whatever, I've come to realize that for me, when I get stressed out or anxious because I'm worried that I'm going to impulsively blurt something, which was an ADHD trait that was quite prevalent for me and seems to be, the research shows that impulsive blurting or verbal impulsivity is very prevalent in girls. And for me, being untreated for all those years, kept right on going right into adulthood. So my warning bells were, okay, I'm in a situation that's new to me. I'm in a social situation that's difficult for me, and I could hear myself talking faster. That's a warning bell that I'm out of control, and I may say something inappropriate or something I'll regret or embarrass myself. My stomach clenches, so that's another physical sign for me. So I hope some of you have come more to grips with where that might show up for you. Also, your family. ADHD is a big deal in the family, of course, especially if you're diagnosed late in life. How do you talk to your family about it? How do you share with them the information that you now have about what may have been impeding good relationships within the family? How do you include your family members to understand better where you're coming from, and maybe even recruit them to help you in managing your ADHD? These are all the sorts of things that we think about when we think about family. And of course, if you're a woman with children, or if you're the ADHD dad, how does that manifest in the family with the children? Do your kids have ADHD as well? Because then, of course, problems can get to be exponentially more complex. If everyone is disorganized, if everyone has trouble with time management, there are some really special and big challenges there. And again, it's all about awareness. So becoming more aware of how this manifests. The next area we talked about was work. And of course, work is a big one because we're adults. Working is something that we have to do. How do we do this successfully? So becoming aware of what not just your challenges are at work, but what are your strengths? Perhaps finding a workplace that fits better now that you're more aware of what you're good at, what you might never be good at, and where you're happiest. What fits in with your personality, and also raising your comfort zone around who you are and becoming more authentic at the workplace and elsewhere in your life, and being more comfortable with not being perfect. And we'll get to that a little bit more later about how we can accept ourselves. Friends. Friends is a big deal. Friends is a big deal because so many of us have lost friendships because of our ADHD, have lost friendships because we lacked self-awareness. We weren't aware of how we were coming across, and we weren't cognizant of what our friends valued in a friendship and how we were being blocked in being able to give that and being able to satisfy the needs that our friends have, and still honoring our own needs. So that's a big one too. And romantic relationships, of course, whether it's with a spouse or whether you're dating, these areas are also super problematic. So I listed a number of resources on how to become more aware of what your role is in a romantic relationship, and how can you rethink and reframe that role. How can there be a more equitable and a more sensible division of labor? What really makes sense? For example, if you're a woman with ADHD and you have difficulty with, let's say, finances. I had difficulty with finances through my whole life, so I probably wouldn't be the best one to take care of the family budget, for example. So thinking about things like that and coming up with something that both partners are comfortable with, and also being very much aware of acknowledging what you love and value in the other person, and making sure that that comes into play, that we accept each other as whether we have ADHD or we don't. We're not flawless, and it's important to get that kind of balance. And finally, the big picture. Where do I fit in? What is my life's purpose? And I was thinking about this, and I've been, ever since the first webinar, I've been thinking about my own awareness. What sort of strategies am I using in my own life? What do I do almost without thinking now to manage my ADHD? And it's been nearly a decade since I was diagnosed, and I realize, hey, I've come a long way, baby. And it's a good feeling. It's really important to take stock every once in a while. And again, I'll talk about this a little bit later, about how important it is to work the strategies, have your ADHD treatment in place, but to stop and also acknowledge how far you've come. So, for example, I don't really worry anymore very often about impulsive blurting, which is such a relief. I'm so much more relaxed in my life, and it's just been a great thing. But that was a hard fought thing. I had to work really hard at that. So, oh, I should remind you, please do put your questions in the question panel, and I will try to get to all of them before we're through. And I hope that tonight, of course, it isn't just about questions. It's also about sharing what has worked for us and strategies that you've tried that have been, successful in managing your ADHD. So with the big picture, where do I fit in and what is my life's purpose? I really thought about that for myself, and I thought, does this mean always being comfortable, always being in situations where I don't feel challenged because of my ADHD? Well, of course not. People with ADHD are nothing if not brave. And I have to say that once you know really clearly what your values are, not anybody else's, not the conventional societal norms, what is really important to you and only you, then you can start to fashion your life in a way that's meaningful. So for me, I was thinking about tonight and every webinar I do actually, and especially the ones that I'm presenting as well. Why? I want to be really honest about that. Why do I do these webinars? Well, because it's got a lot of value to me. I hope it offers a lot of value to you. PsychCentral.com does webinars on a wide variety of mental health topics. And so I've had as presenters many, many other experts on everything from Asperger's to trauma. The end of the month, we're having a speaker who's going to be wonderful talking about trauma and how to move through it and how to become more resilient with trauma. And I'm really excited about it. So everyone that I have as a guest presenter adds value. And the replay of the webinar is available at the YouTube channel for Psych Central. But to be honest with you, I have ADHD. Putting these webinars together is excruciating for me. Let me just give you a little snapshot of what I go through each and every time I do one of these webinars. So tonight I'm getting ready, and you know what? It's like snakes on a plane. I am so out of my comfort zone. I'm sitting in my office, and the snakes are, I've got computers. Is the lighting okay? Can I read my notes? Did I turn off my phone? I have a landline. If the phone rings because I've forgotten to turn it off, then that's going to get picked up on the audio. And what about if someone comes to the door and knocks on the door in the middle of the webinar. So I've got to put notes on the door. I've got to create a PowerPoint presentation. I do research. I have to advertise the webinar. What if nobody shows up? You know, and on and on and on. What if nobody participates? It's really anxiety producing. Honestly, it really is. Technical stuff. What if, okay, here's a great one. After doing these things for a few years, I finally decided, hey, it's really important to get the owner and the psychologist who actually started Psych Central to do a webinar to talk about, you know, it's our 25th anniversary, and maybe do an overview of where we started. So I invited him, Dr. John Grohl, and sure enough, of all the webinars I've ever done, guess when my power went out? Yep, the one where the presenter was my boss. It's the only time it's happened, but it was really challenging for me, to say the least. I mean, we managed to save it. We managed to get things back together, and I'm happy to say that you can, and I would really recommend that you do watch that webinar because it's incredibly moving. The roots of Psych Central were fantastic. But anyway, so that's the big picture. That's something I value, and I'll do my best and my utmost to fulfill that mission, to share awareness on a variety of mental health topics. So that's me. I'm hoping that some of you have tried some of the strategies, and I'm wondering, you know, what worked for you. So please look at your questions panel, and instead of a question, maybe you could write in something that worked for you. And again, by sharing your strategies and tips, you will be eligible for the draw for my book, ADHD According to Zoë. So I'd like to share some things that have worked for me. And I got a few really good examples while I was paying attention this month to what kinds of things I do typically. So for example, I have a medication that I take in the morning, and it has to be taken without food, and I have to wait for a few hours before I can eat breakfast. And as someone with ADHD, I know that it's really important to have breakfast. Our brains, and I mean everybody's brain needs our fuel, but with ADHD, we need specific kinds of fuel, and our brains just work better with all the help they can get. So good sleep, good nutrition, and that kind of thing. So how am I going to manage this medication in the morning on an empty stomach? I came up with something after fuddling around for a little bit and not being sure whether or not I'd taken it. I set my alarm early. I put my medication on my bedside table, and when the alarm goes off, I take the medication, and then I go back to sleep. So how do I know if I've actually taken that medication? Well, after I've taken it, I put it on the floor. Now, I don't have kids, so I don't need to worry about, I don't need to worry about anyone taking medication who shouldn't be. I don't need to worry about the dog eating my medication because I don't have a dog. And so that's safe for me, but it is a strategy that works. Another strategy I could have come up with is to take the medication and put it in a drawer, because I have drawers in my bedside table. That would have worked just as well. So whatever works for you. I'm going to take a sip of water. Another thing that I struggle with a lot is hypersensitivity. Dr. Gabor Mate, who is an ADHD expert, he has ADHD himself, actually. He wrote a book called Scattered, and it's wonderful, and I highly recommend it. He's got an entire chapter devoted to ADHD and hypersensitivity, both physical hypersensitivity and emotional. And in fact, he and some other ADHD experts that I've read and spoken to, some of them believe that hypersensitivity is one of the core symptoms of ADHD, and Dr. Mate would argue that it is ADHD, that this is a a profound thing in people with ADHD, and I do know it's true for me. So I've got a few examples about emotional hypersensitivity. So at work, I work with individuals on a part-time basis who are quite different from me, and I know that for myself, I'm very hypersensitive to graphic images of violence. I'm extremely sensitive about abuse of anyone, especially animals. And where I work, we all have lunch together. And there's a TV screen. It's muted, but it's there. And sometimes the conversation goes to topics that get quite graphic. And because I've come to terms with my own hypersensitivity, I have actually on occasion removed myself from the conversation. I just pick up my plate and I go and I eat somewhere else in a quiet part of the room. And I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not embarrassed by that. And I do make sure that I'm friendly and professional, and I have good relationships with people at work regardless. But I don't want to participate in those conversations, and I simply don't feel that I need to expose myself to something I'm hypersensitive to. So that's worked just fine. There were a couple other things that happened this week, and some of them got me thinking on a deeper level about ADHD awareness, and I'd really like to share that with you as well. So just last night, I use Twitter a lot, and an individual was on Twitter who sent a tweet to me and to Psych Central making a comment about a mental health issue. And I was perplexed because it seemed like misinformation to me. It was information that on a topic that I'm aware of. And so I asked a question, could you please explain? And then the tweeter became slightly belligerent and said things like, well, anyone who's paying attention should know this, and my strategies or my theory changed the world. And it started to escalate quickly into becoming bizarre. Tweets kept coming that became more personal. And then finally, the person asked me where I lived, at which point I started to panic and I wanted to block them on Twitter. So before I did that, I used a strategy that I've often used because I am aware of being emotionally hypersensitive. And I will say that being a writer and being in the public eye, I have received actual death threats. Yes, I have. So that's not much fun, and it's got nothing to do with ADHD, but it does raise your, how shall I say, vigilance or awareness or fear factor slightly. And I've also been stalked. So that being said, I'm emotionally hypersensitive. So what I did with this, what was obviously a Twitter troll, I called a friend of mine who's a good friend who accepts me with my ADHD. She's incredibly supportive. She does not have ADHD, and she is not emotionally hypersensitive. So I called her to get a second opinion, and I called her to get support. And I have to say, we might be asking ourselves, well, Zoe, it's a troll, just block them. Why would you not just immediately block this person? And I asked myself that. And this was a part of becoming more aware of ADHD and how it manifests in me. Why did I not just block this person? Well, I was afraid that I might be wrong. And when you peel back the layers and look at this, what does that mean? Well, it's a legacy of living with undiagnosed ADHD and second guessing myself. I grew up as a child with ADHD being told that, what I was saying or how I was acting was wrong. When I said black, my mom would say white. And so I have a legacy of questioning myself So I wanted to make sure that what I was seeing was what I was seeing. I felt some anxiety about it. What if I blocked them and they found me elsewhere and continued to escalate? I had fear, so I had some fear, and I had ambivalence. And yes, some of this has to do with emotional hypersensitivity and also with a legacy of ADHD. So the value of having a friend who doesn't have ADHD and is not emotionally hypersensitive was to be able to get a different perspective, to get perspective on the situation, to get a more objective view. And she also reminded me that I was hypersensitive. She could hear the reaction and the fear in my voice. And she didn't criticize the fact that I was hypersensitive. She accepted it and was very respectful. But she also reminded me that not everyone's reaction would be to the extent of my reaction. And that was helpful. And finally, at the end of the day, she validated what my assessment of the situation was, and that I had assessed it correctly, and that the proper course of action, and in fact the only course of action, of course, was to block this person, which I duly did. So let's hope that that's the end of that. So there's a lot to unpack there. And I'm going to just check now and see what questions we have. Okay, so I hope everybody is still hearing me. Okay, so I have another example of the emotional hypersensitivity. And again, this got me thinking of how our awareness needs to go deeper than just ADHD itself. It's like, as I said, peeling back an onion. So another example I want to offer is the example of a recent falling out that I had with a friend. It was a misunderstanding and something that I felt we needed to clear the air over. So I set up a meeting, and it was for today. And then as soon as I woke up this morning, I thought, I started panicking and thinking that this meeting might get me upset. It may not go as well as I want it to go. So I rescheduled it. And I had so many mixed feelings about this entire situation. I mean, I didn't want to be interpreted by rescheduling the meeting as, oh, this isn't important to me. Because how many times in your life have you been misinterpreted? This is a key with ADHD, that others interpret our actions and what we say, or even our facial expressions and body language sometimes. It's misinterpreted, and it's often misinterpreted in a negative way. So when I peel back the layers of the onion in this situation, the ADHD part of me, because I'm emotionally hypersensitive, had anxiety. And I found that living with the ongoing tension of having a misunderstanding between myself and a dear friend was distracting. And it distracted me from other things that I have to do. I just wanted to get it over with, to get it resolved. It was hanging over my head, and the sooner that I took care of that, the better. That was my thinking. So it was a mixed blessing to reschedule, because it both relieved the pressure of knowing that I would not be in a meeting just before this webinar, and I wouldn't be coming into the webinar feeling stressed out if things did not go well. But I also at the same time felt like, oh no, am I coming across as unreliable? Am I coming across like I don't really care about this? So the ADHD symptoms that were involved in this situation, and again, this is about being aware of what's going on. So the actual ADHD piece was my emotional hypersensitivity. Having an unresolved conflict is really, really painful and really, really stressful, and it's distracting. Also, memory. As time goes on, the incident the incident that took place that caused the misunderstanding becomes less clear. What really happened? What were my feelings then? What is it that I need to share with my friend in the hopes of resolving it? And also time management. I should have realized that planning a meeting just an hour and a half before our webinar tonight was probably not a good call. This incident has been ongoing for a couple of months now, and of all days to schedule our meeting to clear the air, maybe today wasn't the best day. So that's the very direct ADHD layer. And then underlying that was self-care, fear, anxiety, and self-esteem. If I take care of myself, if I take care of my anxiety and my fear of losing a friendship, then that takes the pressure off of a situation like this. If I meditate, if I put measures in place that keep me more calm and more centered and more balanced, then I can live more successfully and have less tension around unresolved emotional issues. It addresses that hypersensitivity. So those are some of the things that I'm aware of that I've been doing for myself in becoming more aware of my ADHD and also the layers that go beyond the symptoms themselves. I also looked at resources. So for example, at work, a lot of us are ADHD entrepreneurs that we have found that working for ourselves, at least in part, is a really great way to go in terms of having an income. So there are some great tips out there for the workplace for people who are entrepreneurs with ADHD. So I would really recommend Marilyn Strong's book for one. It's one for ADHD entrepreneurs, and one of Marilyn Strong's tips is, again, to really become aware of your strengths and your challenges. And if you have to hire an assistant or contract out work, and I love this, she says, make sure it's somebody who will hold your feet to the fire, who will hold you accountable and not let you, for example, miss deadlines because of your ADHD. And that's a great idea. So to make sure that at our workplace that we have someone who will hold us accountable. And this ties in with accountability partners and the idea of having an accountability partner in different areas of life. So one of the things that I'm looking forward to in November is there's a program for writers like myself. I'm hoping to write a novel. It's my first one in November. And there's a program for the month of November for writing an entire novel for that month. And so you sign up, and it's called novel, I don't remember what it's called, but if you Google novel writing in November, if you're interested, you sign up. And guess what? As an integral part of that program, they have accountability partners. And that's my word, not theirs. But in essence, what it means is that you've got a cohort of other would-be novelists, and you check in with each other, you support each other, you keep each other on track, and so you don't feel so alone with this task. So it's not just a great idea for dealing with ADHD, but having an accountability partner when you do have ADHD is a great idea, and that can be at work, that can be for your finances, that can be your friendships. It's something good to try. So, what else? Finances. That's a good one. When I'm dealing with finances, disorganization has been one of the areas that's been problematic for me. So I found a book called 10 Simple Solutions to Adult ADHD. That's a one that does include things about finances. And actually, in the back of my book, ADHD According to Zoë, there are other resources as well to look at that include financial matters. And one of the tips that I really latched onto that worked for me is keeping track of monthly expenses. So I save all my receipts, and before I file them, I highlight the date and I highlight the amount, and then I put them in my file for the month. And that makes, when I actually start inputting my amounts in my spreadsheet, that much easier and that much quicker. It gets the receipt off my desk, so it helps with clutter, and it keeps me organized. So that's just a little tip that works for me and finances. So what else? Having a mentor. Having a mentor is really, really helpful. So having a mentor, talking to someone, let's say, for example, if you're applying to a new job, which I often am, it's really good to talk to someone, and preferably someone who knows you, but also someone who's already done that job. I find that with ADHD, because I have a legacy of before my diagnosis and ADHD treatment, I've been fired from jobs. I've been in positions that really didn't suit my skills. And so when it comes time to find more suitable employment, I recently, this month, had a meeting with someone who's actually done that position. And because she knows me, she was able to, like my friend with the Twitter troll, she was able to point out some of the strengths that I have to bring to this position that I probably wouldn't have thought of. So that was incredibly helpful. Talking to someone who's done the job and talking to them and asking about tips, what it takes, where your ADHD might come in to be a negative or where it might be a positive, can be really helpful as well. Time management. Time management is a big one for me, although I have to say it's one of the things over the last almost 10 years that's become, I can't say something I never think about, but definitely something that's just gotten so much better. And one of the things that I do with that is, of course, kiss of death. If you really have to get out the door in time, do not turn on the computer. I still do it sometimes, but if I'm running late especially, I won't turn on the computer because I know that I might get sucked into checking Facebook or email or jumping on Twitter, and I can get lost down the rabbit hole. I can be hyper-focused, and there's nothing, almost nothing, that can set me off my path more quickly than turning on my computer before having to go out the door to work. So that's a slippery slope for me, for sure. So I'm wondering if any of you have any tips that you want to share. And don't forget that by doing so, you are entered into the draw for a free book. So I am looking for my questions panel and seeing if anyone has any questions. Okay. And first of all, I guess I want to ask, did any of you download the handouts? Please raise your hand if you did download the handouts for this month. So I'll just wait. Click on the hand if you did download the handouts. Okay. Well, all right. I guess the handouts are still available. So if you go to my website, zoekessler.com, please feel free to download the handouts and try the exercises and the strategies that you'll find there. So moving along, I also wanted to talk tonight about the bright side. I had mentioned in our webinar description that it's also really, really important as far as ADHD awareness goes to be aware of the positives. What are the positives of having ADHD? I'm really, really excited that there's more and more research coming out on creativity and ADHD. And one of the things that I like to point out is that because our brains really do make connections that others don't make, this is one of the benefits. It's one of the bonuses. To me, if you're making connections between things that others might not see, then that's inherently creative. And, you know, a lot of stand-up comedians have ADHD. And when you think about it, next time you watch a stand-up comedian or listen to a joke or hear anybody who you just think is funny, listen for how they interpret things differently. Listen for how they put two things together that might surprise you. It's a great, great source of comedy, and it's one of the standard ways to create humor is to put a little twist on something that we haven't heard before, something fresh. So that's creativity and how we can see things in a way that it's also a great aspect for leadership. Putting a fresh spin on things in a brainstorming session is inherently a great trait for leadership as well. And energy, a lot of us have a ton of energy. So this ties into leadership. We're the kind of people who can have tons of enthusiasm and tons of compassion. People with ADHD aren't all alike. I don't mean to suggest that. But many of us do have a lot of energy. And when you bring that, for example, to the workplace, in a brainstorming session, or if we're working in a team of people and the energy might be flagging, our enthusiasm can really rally the troops. We can be the people who can bring a fresh start to a project. Okay, we may not be the ones who are going to get that project finished or completed, but we certainly can energize others around us to go ahead and go forward with the tasks. And that's really valuable. I mean, motivation is key, and we know that in ourselves. Motivation to get anything done is really, really key. So that's another positive of ADHD. Creativity, lots of energy, and leadership. So we also have spontaneity, and I know that that can be called or thought of as impulsivity. And when it's impulsivity, it can work in our favor, believe it or not, being spontaneously funny. When your ADHD treatment or ADHD management is in place, and I know this from personal experience, I don't worry as much about impulsively blurting inappropriate things or something that might hurt someone's feelings. This has taken years of practice, ADHD treatment, and structures, and just understanding more about what ADHD is, but now I can channel that, quote, impulsivity into being spontaneous, into being impulsively funny, or into being spontaneous about doing something fun, or going on an adventure, or seeing an opportunity and presenting that opportunity to others. So that's a way that I can turn that around and make that work for me. So there are a lot of positive traits to ADHD. We also, I think probably those of you here with us tonight know that ADHD has nothing to do with IQ. It's got, in fact, a lot of people with ADHD, and I really honestly don't know what the research is on this or if we even have it, but a lot of people with ADHD have above average intelligence. And so we can use our quick minds, our rapid minds, our quick thinking minds, and our intelligence to think on our feet. If we're interested in something, we're going to absorb that information really, really quickly. We thrive on stimulation, and we can also adapt really well to change. And I do know some people with ADHD who don't like change, and that has to do with structure and organization and so on. But a lot of us just really thrive and get fueled by change, and lots of it, because it's stimulating. I was going to say we can multitask, but research has shown that nobody multitasks. It's actually more that we're moving through different activities and different tasks more quickly than others. It just looks and feels like multitasking, but still, it is an advantage, or at least it can be an advantage. So, I mean, for me tonight, I'm sort of juggling a lot of things, running the webinar and the PowerPoint, and it's stressful. But there are other situations where juggling and managing many things at once is stimulating, it's exciting, it's fun, and it works to my advantage. And so we need to find situations that can capitalize on that positive part of us as well. And I'm sure there are more, and I'm sure you can think of more. I've thought of more as well for women. And this is some of these things are things that I have never heard anyone talk about. The first one we have heard before, and that is self-acceptance. So for a woman being diagnosed with ADHD, it's incredibly important to reassess who we are and to begin to accept ourselves as we are. There's research that shows one of the differences between ADHD in boys and girls in school, for example, is that the girls tend to suffer from more peer rejection and more neglect from their peers. And this impacts their social skills over time. So in other words, social skills become worse and worse, and girls can self-isolate, girls can become depressed, they can internalize shame. And one of the key symptoms that's different in girls and boys looks like it's verbal impulsivity. And again, there's research that backs this up, and it's that kind of interrupting others in speech. It's impulsively blurting things that may not be connected to the conversation because you've tuned out and you haven't followed the conversation. And all of these things, if ADHD is not diagnosed and not treated, can follow you well into adulthood. So one's self-esteem erodes. If you're losing friends, if you're getting fired from jobs, your self-esteem and your self-confidence can drop until you get the diagnosis, until you are aware and understand your ADHD. And then you can start to build self-acceptance. So on the bright side, once we accept ourselves and who we are, then we can really go forward and really start to really shake up the world and shake up our own lives with our positives. Self-advocacy is another one that I think is really, really important. When you're more aware of your ADHD and how it manifests in your own life, you can begin to make your own life better. So one of the examples I've already given is that I don't expose myself to violent movies. I don't expose myself to graphic images, whether it's on the news or wherever. I can advocate for myself. I can take care of myself. If I'm in a crowded room, I was in a waiting room one time, and there were many TV screens in the room, and they were really loud. Lots of people were talking, and I was asked to fill out a form. Well, not only could I not fill out the form, but I was so overwhelmed and overstimulated by this atmosphere with a lot of auditory processing challenges that I was having. I knew that it was going to be stressful to me to try and fill out the form. And so what I did was I went to the receptionist and I asked her if it would be possible to turn off one of the television screens. I wasn't embarrassed about it. I wasn't ashamed of it. It was no big deal for me. But the point is, I did it. And you know what? I have found every time that I've done that, and I've done that more than once in a restaurant that has really, really loud music. If I'm trying to have a conversation with my dinner partner, I'll ask the staff to turn down the music. And I've never in any of those situations had anyone say no. Although I have to say I expect it because it's, me versus all the neurotypical people, all the people with no auditory processing challenges, all the people who don't have ADHD and who can become overstimulated by lighting, by visuals, by sound, by cacophony. There were many more of them in those situations than there were of me, but it was easy for people um, to go ahead and grant my request. It wasn't a big deal. And the more times you do it, the better your life is, the more you feel empowered to take care of yourself, to know what you need, and to respectfully and gently ask for it and get it. And isn't it our own responsibility to manage our ADHD? And if we can if we can corral others around us to help with that, great. So much the better. And then finally, on the bright side, ADHD in women. Now, this is the thing that I haven't heard spoken of before, and I'm really, really quite excited about this. We can be pioneers for other women. Well, how do we do that? Oh, there are so many levels. First of all, we can model health and self-advocacy and self-acceptance while still having a mental health disorder, while still struggling with ADHD. And women with ADHD often have daughters and sons who also have it. So if we're okay with our ADHD, if we're aware of our ADHD, if we take responsibility for ourselves with ADHD, then we're modeling some really good, healthy stuff. But there's another way. I consider myself to be unconventional, and what that means is, like many other women I've spoken with, my priorities, because just dealing with everyday organization and all these other everyday things is takes my energy. I don't prioritize always what I wear. I don't prioritize having the perfect organized home. It's not a priority to me to get my nails done. It's not a priority. A lot of things are not a priority to me that seem to be the norm. And guess what? I'm okay with that. Women with ADHD can be pioneers in terms of defining who we are and what our values are. We can be pioneers in the workforce. Unconventional roles and jobs for women are filled with lots of women with ADHD.